Hello and welcome to London Mozart Players at Home. I'm Fiona Brice. I am the collaborative composer in association with the London Mozart Players. I work on a variety of different projects for the orchestra, but the one I'd like to talk about today is arranging the first movement of Mozart's Symphony G minor, number 40. I've been tasked with arranging this for string quartet. This means it's a reduction. Of course, when you go to see this piece performed by the orchestra in a conventional classical setting, you'll see an orchestra of 30 people, thereabouts. And I have to reduce this to 4 players and maintain its musical integrity and not lose any of the harmony or melody. So it's kind of a puzzle. It's what I call a traditional arranging job in the sense that I'm not rewriting this piece. I'm not adding my own compositional influences to it. I have to remain faithful to the original piece. It's extremely well known, of course, which makes that perhaps a slightly more daunting task. There's nowhere to hide. Some of the things in my favour are the fact that Mozart was an extremely economical composer. There are no notes that are unnecessary in Mozart. Everything is there for a reason, and when you study his scores and you listen, that kind of space in the writing becomes very clear. I also have the advantage of being a violin player, so I have played this symphony and therefore I know it sort of from the inside out. And that is a help. But the best thing to do is to go to the source, so go to the miniature score, and the first problem I encounter is the start of the symphony, which we'll know the harmony is carried by the violas, and I mean more than one viola. You can see that it is a divisi viola part. So this causes me a problem because I only have one viola, and I kind of need the other instruments for the rest of it. So my first problem, this harmony in the viola, is all within the viola part. So my first problem is how do I make that work? I have to make the decision to take the violin 2 off of the melody. The violin 1 and 2 are playing together. Now, we know that tune, and I don't think the ear is going to mind if I lose the lower octave, so it's still there. So that allows me to put the violin 2 player onto the upper harmony of the viola part. These are the kind of problems that, as an arranger, you just have to make musical decisions. Now, having made that decision, I have to make sure that will work throughout the piece. I can't just do that at the start and then, try and come up with some other solution later. So I try to be consistent because, again, that is something that is consonant with Mozart. He is absolutely consistent in his writing. So the second problem I have is range, double bass. I don't have one. So I'm reliant on the lower end of the cello, which only takes us down here as opposed to the octave below. That doesn't matter too much in Mozart because he actually scores the cello and bass together for quite a lot of the symphony. This is in keeping with classical writing, and not just in Mozart. So that's not too bad. It's not like I'm having to translate Strauss or Wagner or something extremely dense. But I still have to make a fair amount of choices about register. Third problem I've got is that the woodwind, the 9 woodwind players that would normally be playing counter melody and melody are not at my disposal. So I have to juggle the melodic lines between the violins. When we get to the second subject, we have strings. Still strings. Woodwind. Strings. So I have to blend all that into one, and I suppose the initial instinct would be, oh, give it all to the first violin, but then we don't have a change in colour, and it becomes more like a violin sonata. So I try to distribute that between violin 1, violin 2. Occasionally, if I'm able to bring the viola into that melodic scheme of things, I'll do that as well. Another problem is a practical one for the musicians. They are very used to playing this symphony. They're very used to playing these specific parts of the symphony. And so for me to give the violin player the second violin player suddenly playing the viola part, now that's confusing. We work a lot with muscle memory string players, and our fingers will want to go to the part that we've learned for decades, and in this instance I'm asking the players not to do that. So they're going to have to concentrate quite hard and not go with their sort of gut feel of what they're playing. And I will be relying on them quite a lot for interpretation, as I say, in terms of colour and the kind of style that they're going to bring to this. Because even though we've reduced 30 players to 4, we still need to keep the dynamic range of the piece. So the tutti sections, they need to be really forceful, and you know, it's quite a big ask of the players. Something that is a practical consideration that you may not initially think about is that for 4 players to maintain a piece of this duration, they're going to need to turn pages. Now, they're not getting a break. Normally, as a composer, I would say if you haven't given the players a break, if there's not enough break to turn pages, then you've written too much music. And you need to go back and look at that. But in this instance, I have to be faithful to Mozart and I have to carry the piece. So when I've done my arrangement, I then have to go back through it and think, what could I possibly lose in order for the players to be able to have a little break and turn the page. It's a very practical consideration, but it becomes a musical consideration. One of the final problems, I suppose, you have as an arranger is that, of course, you're reading multiple clefs. So this is what we call a transposing score. The violins, the flutes, the oboes are written in treble clef, but the cellos are in bass clef, the bassoons are in bass clef, but the horns are in different keys. We've got horn in B flat, horn in G, clarinet is in B flat. And all that means is that when I look at the page, the notes I'm looking at aren't necessarily the notes that you're hearing at first glance. It means that when you're replicating the score, you could quite easily make mistakes because you're reading the clef incorrectly. And you might be thinking, how am I creating this arrangement? You know, is it pen and paper, pencil and paper? No, I'm using software. I'm using Sibelius software. It's a notation program, and it allows me to firstly, I input all the notes, so I really write the whole thing in. And then it allows me to cut and paste or to copy passages where I need to. But the main benefit is that it allows me to hear the piece as I'm working on it. And that just helps to iron out mistakes. It's a tool that speeds up the arranging process. Obviously there will be a rehearsal for this piece, and the players will get to point out any mistakes they may have made, but I don't want to waste time in rehearsals just correcting silly errors. So I hope that's given you a little insight into the mind of a composer arranger, and I look forward to you being able to join us when we do get to perform this piece, which I believe will be at the Fairfield Hall, but it won't be until next year.